Welcome to the annual research conference, also from my side. Welcome to this morning session on innovation policy. Innovation policy and innovation policy in the context of artificial intelligence is a very broad topic. It includes innovation in artificial intelligence. It also covers innovation through AI. That was a point that stressed strongly by Philippe Aghion just in the keynote lecture. It is about lessons for policy and lessons from policy. It is about enabling and incentivizing. It covers elements such as the availability of complementary factors and production inputs, including skills, infrastructure, data, energy. It covers regulation. It covers taxation. And it is a very wide-ranging agenda, therefore. That said, we are not supposed or we are not aiming to be exhaustive in this session, but rather want to focus or to zoom into a few aspects of innovation policy. And we have ordered the talks in on a continuum, I would say, from innovation in AI via general AI adoption towards innovation through AI, covering issues on regulation, regulatory competition in the field of AI, the potential of tax incentives for innovation, AI adoption and the role of geography as well, the role of distance, and finally, innovation through AI. Can AI speed up innovation in other sectors, in other fields, notably the clean tech and the green transition here? We are happy to have a set of very distinguished speakers with us to guide us or to go with us through this session. These are Lars Hornuf, Professor at Dresden University, Georges Cavalier from University of Lyon, Jennifer Hunt from Rutgers University, and Pierre Andres from Durham University. All are very distinguished economists, researchers. It would take too much time to go through their personal and professional achievements here. For this, I refer to the website and would rather want to kick off the meeting, the session, by giving the floor to Lars, please. We have seen 30 minutes for presentation, and then we have time for questions and answers as well.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here to the annual research conference. I usually do empirical research, but today I would like to present a conceptual paper, which is joint work with Christian Peukert and Daniel Schnoor. I'm saying that it's a conceptual paper because I usually do my talks free, and this might feel a little bit like an audiobook, but I hope you still enjoy it and will take some important insights away from it. The article will be published as an opinion piece in the journal Electronic Markets by the end of the year, and you're more than welcome to download it. I provided the QR code, which you can scan, but it will also be available on the journal website later on. So in today's digital economy, regulation is no longer just a concern of domestic policy. It is a central axis of global competition. AI policy often also follows geopolitical goals, be it in terms of industrial policy, but also by promoting domestic infrastructure with the aim of establishing digital sovereignty. While today's regulatory landscape is rapidly evolving, it is fragmented and uneven across the globe. At the same time, companies are strategically navigating and at times exploiting differences between jurisdictions, customizing compliance to minimize constraints and maximize freedom to innovate. The result is a new kind of regulatory competition with high stakes for economic leadership, digital sovereignty, and the protection of fundamental rights. Regulation not only affects market structure and competition policy. As AI diffuses into all parts of the economy, the rules that govern its development and deployment will also determine whose data is protected and whose interests are represented. Regulatory choices are not just technical or administrative. They encode values into systems that increasingly shape decisions about credit, hiring, policing, education, healthcare, and beyond. In this context, regulatory competition is not just more complex, it's also more consequential. It shapes not just market outcomes, but normative baselines for fairness and accountability that can have extraterritorial effects. Let's first define what regulatory competition is. Regulatory competition describes competition between states or different regulatory levels to gain an advantage through a particular regulation over other states or regulatory levels. A prerequisite for regulatory competition to occur is that the regulated entities make choices and select the rules that are most advantageous for them, which is often referred to as regulatory arbitrage. In an early model by Thibault from the 1950s, communities decided on budget expenditures and which public goods are financed. Individuals then choose their location by physically moving and receiving a bundle of government services and infrastructure. However, such physical relocation is not always necessary. For example, certain rights can be granted from a state or another regulatory level without the regulated entity having to be physically located there. A frequently studied example is corporate law. In the US, companies can choose the corporate law of their liking from another state without having to physically relocate their headquarters there. For example, we all know Meta Platforms is incorporated in the state of Delaware, but its headquarters is in Menlo Park, California, where its main operations take place. This leads to the question of whether regulatory arbitrage also leads to regulatory competition. In the empirical economics literature, there is numerous evidence that companies make choices about their regulatory location and engage in tax arbitrage. Moreover, other regulated entities, such as individuals, might also physically relocate, for example, to benefit from a more benevolent consumer insolvency regime. Regarding the choice of individual rights, there is strong evidence that an unbundled choice of law also takes place. Companies strategically choose their corporate law, contract law, insolvency law, while individuals choose their marriage or divorce law regime, among others. In many cases, regulatory arbitrage also leads to regulatory competition among rule makers, at least for a certain period of time. Where does this lead us in terms of economic welfare? According to the Thibault model, more mobility among the regulated entities will improve the allocation of government expenditures in the same sense that mobility among jobs and knowledge relevant to the location of industry and labor improved allocation of private resources. However, this positive prediction has been contradicted in the tax competition literature, where tax competition often leads to a race to the bottom. With regard to unbundled rights, especially in corporate law, some scholars have argued that regulatory competition leads to a positive discovery process, while others, such as Lucien Babchuk, empirically deny this. This lack of empirical clarity led William Bratton in the 1990s to famously write that competition in corporate law is a race to nowhere in particular. Hans-Werner Sinn further contends that while government regulation might initially be welfare enhancing, for example by addressing collective action problems or information asymmetries, exposure to regulatory competition at the higher level, such as the EU, can undermine these benefits. Thus, supranational regulatory competition may reintroduce the very market failures that active national economic regulation seeks to correct. For the digital economy, research on regulatory competition is only beginning to emerge, as in the edited volume that Michael Denga and I have recently published. Probably much more famously, Anu Bradford argued that through the enactment of regulation that influence the global business landscape, raise international standards, and contribute to the Europeanization of key sectors in global trade, the EU has successfully influenced policies in areas such as data privacy, consumer health and safety, environmental protection, antitrust, and online hate speech, which she famously called the Brussels effect. In our paper, we primarily answer three questions. What does regulatory arbitrage look like in a world of distributed computation and transnational model deployment? How does different governance regimes shape not just compliance, but the trajectory of innovation itself? And what role can global coordination play in mitigating fragmentation and enabling inclusive digital governance? To understand how regulatory competition may unfold in the AI domain, my co-authors and I have developed a broad typology of governance models that have shaped the regulatory approaches for the digital economy. Following Bradford, we essentially distinguish three stylized models that dominate global digital regulation. The market-driven model exemplified by the United States, the rights-driven model of the European Union, and the state-driven model by China. Each model reflects different assumptions about the relationship between the state, the market, and individual rights, and each informs jurisdictional approaches how to govern technologies. Of course, while analytically useful, these models are ideal types. For example, China not only exercises tight domestic control over digital technologies, but also exports digital infrastructure and actively participates in international standard-setting bodies. Today's AI development is deeply entangled with national policy priorities regarding basic science carried out at public universities, but also corporate research and development, which affects international diplomacy. As such, AI is not just regulated, it is a side of regulatory competition, a domain in which jurisdictions pursue normative, technical, and geopolitical influence. Increasingly, regulatory competition is not merely a contest over the most efficient and innovation-friendly legal frameworks. It also reflects deeper tensions related to societal values, for example, whether to prioritize democratic oversight, social stability, technical innovation, and individual autonomy. In this sense, regulatory systems compete not only in terms of economic performance, but also in projecting distinct models of social order and governance to others. So what does regulatory competition look like, and in which areas does it take place? State-of-the-art AI requires both extraordinary training compute and substantial capacity for serving models during inference, which makes infrastructure elements the essential foundation of the AI compute stack. This has driven unprecedented demand for computer chips, particularly GPUs, and the expansion of data centers' capacity. Because the supply of GPUs compatible with the upper layer of the AI compute stack is dominated by NVIDIA, policymakers have expressed particular concerns about access to such chips, which with implications for competition, innovation, and technological sovereignty. While with respect to data centers, regulatory debates have centered especially on energy supply, sustainability, and the simplification of permitting procedures for new developments. Moreover, large amounts of training data have been at the heart of technological breakthroughs in deep learning and large language models. This has sparked controversies about appropriate copyright regimes for AI and the incentives for original content creations. In the EU, concerns about the infringements of European privacy and data protection rules by the collection of AI training data and usage data have led both to temporary and continuous bans on popular AI services in some jurisdictions. Furthermore, access to data collected during the usage of an AI service has raised competition and innovation concerns in the context of data-driven network effects. The release of OpenAI's GPT 3.5 marked a turning point in the development of general-purpose AI. Unlike earlier AI models designed and trained for specific use cases, GPAI models are pre-trained on large and diverse datasets. This pre-training endows them with a substantial degree of generability and enables their application across a wide variety of tasks and domains. GPAI models can substantially be fine-tuned on context-specific data or otherwise adapted to enhance performance and specialized tasks, often yielding significant improvements over earlier, more narrowly focused approaches. Consequently, GPAI models have become a key input for many AI systems. At the same time, their broad applicability makes it difficult to anticipate future uses and risks that may emerge with presence. New challenges for alignment and AI safety policy. Before the advent of GPAI models, AI systems were the focal unit of AI regulation. These systems were typically assumed to be developed with a specific purpose or application in mind. Accordingly, they may be governed either through sector-specific regulation or through horizontal framework applied across sectors. Even horizontal regulation, however, may differentiate rules by domains. For example, the European AI Act established an elaborate system of risk-based regulation with high-risk categories defined according to application areas. Recent technological developments, especially the emergence of agentic AI and the integration of more advanced reasoning capabilities, may challenge this context-specific conception of AI systems by giving rise to GPAI systems. Moreover, the commercial success of AI systems depends critically on their accessibility and visibility to end users. When offered as applications, they must be installed on the operating system of end-user devices, which requires a technical compatibility and approval through the operating service operator screening procedures. AI functionalities may also be more deeply integrated into the operating system, which makes them often the default option for users. Similarly, on digital platforms and services, certain AI providers may enjoy greater visibility and accessibility than others. Think about Microsoft's partnership with OpenAI and Anthropic to power 365 Copilot. Such dynamics raise competition concerns related to self-preferencing, bundling, and tying, or exclusive agreements that limit competitors' ability to access customers on equal terms. Given the significant vertical integration into the AI value chain, such as Google providing mobile operating systems, platform services, and AI models, and a strategic partnership between big tech firms and AI providers, increasing regulatory attention is being paid to risks of market power being leveraged into emerging AI systems, as well as practices that could lock users into AI ecosystems. As AI systems become increasingly autonomous and integrated into everyday life, new governance challenges emerge. For example, the anticipated proliferation of AI agents as well as self-driving vehicles raises questions about who should bear responsibility for their actions. Regulatory frameworks therefore need to clarify issues of liability in cases of harm and specify the extent to which users of AI agents are accountable as their principals. At the same time, the rise of AI agents may require adaptations to consumer protection regulation. On the one hand, such systems could exploit humans in vulnerable or economically disadvantaged situations. On the other hand, personal AI assistants could strengthen consumer bargaining power, for example, by alleviating bounded rationality and information asymmetries. In Western markets, digital platforms and end-user devices, which are often served as the primary gateway to AI services, are dominated by US big tech firms, while European platforms play only a marginal role. However, regulatory instruments are similar to those of earlier phases of regulatory competition. Regulators can resort, for example, to precautionary ex-ante compliance frameworks. In this case, jurisdictions formalize governance through regulations that target identifiable risks and assign obligations to developers, deployers, and users. Ex-ante rules can foster predictability and legal certainty by establishing a clear framework for compliance. However, because such rules must be forward-looking, they risk being either underspecified when formulated as a general principle or overspecified when they attempt to anticipate every conceivable contingency and use case. Regulatees can also resort to self-regulation and soft law instruments. In contexts where binding regulation is limited, firms often take the lead in defining and implementing control mechanisms. For example, access conditions such as API rate limits and fine-tuning restrictions, model documentation, and industry-led safety initiatives can substitute for formal legal rules. Furthermore, regulatory approaches may integrate co-regulation instruments by delegating specific areas of rulemaking to industry stakeholders and/or experts, while public authorities provide the general framework. Finally, governance can also take a more centralized form. AI models, restrictions, and AI model registration, conformity assessments, safety testing, real name access requirements may be built into the regulatory process as mandatory preconditions for AI deployment and commercial use. Some regulators and regulatees might also engage in strategic openness and control. As AI technology is recognized as a driver of economic and military power, countries have resorted to export controls to limit other countries' access to key AI inputs and to foster leadership positions along the AI value chain. Under the Biden administration, the US government issued the framework for artificial intelligence diffusion in January 2025, aimed at maintaining leadership in AI, managing security risks, and enabling the diffusion of beneficial technologies. The framework stipulates both relative shares and absolute caps to limit the number of AI chips that firms can deploy in countries other than the US and its considered partners. The flip side of export controls is restrictions on imports by imposing tariffs or prohibiting the use of product originated from certain countries. For example, the US have banned domestic companies from using telecommunication equipment made by the Chinese technology company Huawei. Conversely, China has banned domestic technology companies from purchasing AI chips produced by the US firm NVIDIA. Conversely, the role of open source AI and corporate science is a key frontier in regulatory competition. On the surface, open weight models such as Meta's Llama and DeepSeek's R1, fully open foundation models such as apparatus developed by Switzerland's public universities appear to democratize access to powerful AI tools. However, in practice, AI operates within a highly uneven resource landscape, where only a few actors possess the compute, data, and expertise necessary to meaningfully participate in the technology race. Firms also use openness strategically. By releasing partially open models or data sets, they can build reputational capital, accelerate adaptation, influence technical standards, and shape public discourse while maintaining control over proprietary assets such as fine-tuned versions, training pipelines, and integration platforms. Openness thus becomes a competitive tool, not just a public good. Governance can approach these tensions differently. Some may promote open source ecosystems as a source of innovation and influence, leveraging the private sector to steer model development. Others may seek to regulate openness through ex-ante frameworks that apply to GPAI systems, regardless of licensing models. Still others may permit open source participation, but place strong restrictions on what can be released, ensuring that models remain aligned with national interests. This creates a regulatory paradoxon. Openness enables proliferation, but weakens oversight. As AI capabilities diffuse and foundation models become more modular and interoperable, it can be expected that open source governance will become an increasingly contested side of regulatory competition. 3 major AI policy documents have been released in 2025 by the EU, the US, and China, in that order. Value priorities are evident in the foundational narratives of each plan. The EU's AI Contingent Action Plan from April 2025 is grounded in a rights-based vision of trustworthy human-centered AI. Anchored in the newly adopted AI Act, the plan aims to strengthen Europeans' AI ecosystem across 5 pillars: compute infrastructure, data availability, adoption in strategic sectors, skills and talent, and regulatory compliance. This reflects the EU's commitment to fairness, safety, and democratic oversight. The US, America's AI Action Plan from July 2025, released under President Trump's administration, frames AI as a driver of geopolitical and economic competition. It stresses national security, open innovation, and minimal regulatory interference, highlighting free speech and anti-censorship as core principles of trustworthy AI. China's Global AI Governance Action Plan, which has been published just days later at the World Artificial Intelligence Conference in Shanghai, articulates a state-led vision that links AI to development goals, policies, political stability, and global equity. It positions AI as an international public good and explicitly aligns its strategy with the UN Global Digital Compact. With regard to openness and control, the EU relies on formal legal frameworks such as the AI Act to assign responsibilities to developers, deployers, and users. It proposes new institutional infrastructures such as AI factories, gigafactories like we learned this morning, and a 200 billion Invest AI facility to ensure alignment between regulation and innovation. The US continues to delegate control to private actors using soft governance mechanisms such as open source norms, voluntary guidelines, and reputational incentives. The plan includes measures to streamline permitting for data centers and chip fabs, expanding domestic semiconductor production, and deploy frontier models in public agencies, especially in defense. China follows a centralized model. It requires model registration, pre-deployment safety checks, and real name authentication. Governance is deeply integrated with the state, with firms expected to align with national strategic priorities in both domestic deployment and global outreach. Jurisdictions may not merely regulate AI domestically. They also seek to project their regulatory models globally, using different mechanisms to influence how AI is governed elsewhere. One well-documented mechanism is the Brussels effect, whereby stringent international and internal regulation leads to global spillover effects. These spillovers occur de facto as firms adjust their global practices to comply with the jurisdiction standard, and de jure as other jurisdictions adopt a similar legal framework. This dynamic has been observed in areas such as data protection, and similar dynamics ought to be expected in the context of AI regulation. Firms' voluntary global adoption of local rules may be driven by cost considerations, as maintaining uniform compliance practices can be less costly than differentiating across jurisdictions, even when these uniform standards exceed what is legally required in some markets. Co-regulation approaches enable regulatees to provide input and potentially shape regulatory implementation to better reflect their specific context and use cases. In the European Union, for example, a large multi-stakeholder process has led to the development of GPAI Code of Practice, which operationalizes the requirements for GPAI models under the European AI Act. Jurisdictions may also seek influence in global standard-setting bodies such as the UN's International Telecommunication Union and the International Electrotechnical Commission. Finally, regulatory influence can occur with more subtle techniques. Through technological dominance and soft power, particularly via open source releases and foundation models, leadership in AI research, and control over compute infrastructure. By shaping what counts as AI frontier, firms and agencies help set de facto global standards, even in the absence of binding legal frameworks. Let me conclude with a so-called New York effect. Hence, jurisdictions differ not only in what they regulate, but also in how they seek to project that regulation abroad and shape the evolving architecture of global AI governance. The EU builds on the Brussels effect by advancing its regulatory model through standard-setting bodies while cultivating multilateral partnerships around shared values. The US leverages its technological leadership and open weight and open source ecosystems to set de facto standards while using export controls to shape access to critical AI resources. China's approach appears similar in certain aspects but seeks global allies by advocating for a multilateral governance model centered on the United Nations, proposing an UN-led international AI science panel and a global AI governance dialogue mechanism. More broadly, the multi-level competition for AI leadership will force governments and companies to trade off the risks of regulatory arbitrage against those of regulatory fragmentation. In this context, the potential emergence of a New York effect to complement the Brussels effect might emerge. Whereas the Brussels effect refers to the ability to externalize regulatory standards through market mechanisms, a New York effect would capture the potential of the UN and related multilateral forums to shape global digital governance through normative leadership, inclusive dialogue, and institutional agenda setting. The most significant expression of this ambition is the Global Digital Compact endorsed by the UN member states in 2024. The Global Digital Compact sets out a shared vision of an inclusive, open, safe, and secure digital future, articulating common principles for digital public infrastructure, responsible AI, and data governance. Unlike national and regional models, the Global Digital Compact seeks to foster procedural legitimacy and global coherence in a fragmented regulatory landscape. To be sure, the UN's approach has significant limitations. Its instruments are non-binding, and its consensus-based multi-stakeholder architecture can dilute accountability and produce vague lowest common denominator outcomes. Nonetheless, it offers an essential forum, especially for countries with limited regulatory capacity, to articulate values, shape interoperable standards, and build capacity through inclusive dialogue, which might be an effective way against fragmentation of regulation based on normative principles. Thank you very much.